In a quaint southern town, a talented African-American hair stylist dedicated herself to her craft, working relentlessly yet earning only a paltry income, barely sufficient to meet her daily needs. One fateful day, after providing a complimentary haircut to a rugged-looking veteran, she found herself unemployed. Her merciless employer publicly shamed her, slashed her wages, and dismissed her without a second thought. She departed with nothing but her self-respect, feeling as though she had lost everything, ensnared in despair and hopelessness. However, unbeknownst to her, her simple act of generosity had garnered immense community support, spreading rapidly and opening doors to unforeseen opportunities she had never anticipated. Rivertown was a place where everyone was familiar with each other, a serene southern locale where life moved at a leisurely pace and traditions were deeply rooted. Nestled between rows of historic buildings was Pearl's Hair Studio, the largest and most recognized salon in the area. It was a go-to spot for the affluent, who visited for their regular touch-ups, where gossip circulated as freely as a hairspray, and where John O. Brooks, a 32-year-old black hair stylist with the hands of an artist, had toiled diligently for years, yearning for the day she could finally liberate herself. Jamal had not always envisioned a future in Rivertown. She harbored grand aspirations. She dreamed of owning her own salon, a welcoming space where anyone, regardless of their background, could walk in and feel valued. Yet, dreams did not pay the bills, and leaving was far from straightforward. She had signed a restrictive contract with Pearl Anderson, the salon's owner, a woman whose reputation for ruthlessness nearly matched her prowess in styling. Pearl had offered Jamal a position when she was fresh out of beauty school, eager and naive. But it soon became evident that Pearl viewed her not as a valuable asset, but merely as another pair of hands to exploit. Pearl made it abundantly clear, without ever articulating it directly, that she believed a black woman like Jamal had no real future in this industry, other than taking appointments, sweeping floors, and knowing her place. Despite building a loyal clientele who frequented the salon because of her exceptional skills, not due to Pearl's name on the sign, Jamal was compensated less than her colleagues and assigned the least desirable shifts. She once attempted to secure a loan to establish her own salon, but banks were hesitant to fund a black stylist in a town still dominated by the old guard. Thus, she remained, swallowing her pride, burying her resentment, and pushing forward one haircut at a time. That morning, as Jamal strolled down Main Street towards her workplace, she paused at a small coffee stand, craving caffeine to brace herself for another lengthy day. It was then that she spotted him, Ray Thompson. Ray had once been a prominent name in Rivertown, a former Army sergeant. He returned from overseas to a town that hailed him as a hero yet treated him like a specter. At 65, he bore the weathered look of a man who had experienced too much, lost too much, and expected even less. His beard was unkempt, and his clothes were somewhat disordered, yet his presence commanded attention. What the townsfolk failed to recognize was that Ray was no ordinary man down on his luck. He was an observer, a writer, a man who donned life's rough edges to gain a deeper understanding of it. Jamal had encountered him years ago when he first returned. They weren't exactly friends, but there existed an unspoken bond between them. Two individuals who understood what it felt like to be outsiders in a place that never fully embraced them. "Morning, Ray," Jamal greeted him, offering a warm yet weary smile. Ray nodded, adjusting the old military cap he always wore. "You look like you could use some coffee," she suggested, gesturing towards a stand. Ray hesitated. "I don't want to be a bother." "Oh, please, I insist," she replied, dismissing his concern before ordering a second cup. When the barista handed it over, Ray took a slow sip, savoring the warmth. "Haven't had a good cup of coffee in a while," he confessed. Jamal leaned against the counter, eyeing him playfully. "You ever gonna let me tidy up that mess?" she teased, pointing at his wild, untamed beard and hair. Ray chuckled, but there was a distant look in his eyes. "Ain't much point in it." Jamal frowned. "Come by the shop later. Let me fix you up." He studied her, truly scrutinizing her, as if trying to decipher what lay behind her offer. He was aware of Pearl, of the kind of person she was, and he also recognized that Jamal wasn't the type to allow something as trivial as a bitter, racist old woman to deter her from doing what was right. "You sure that won't get you into trouble?" he asked cautiously. Jamal hesitated. The truth was, she knew precisely what would happen if Pearl discovered her plan. She had spent years adhering to Pearl's rules, keeping her head down, trying not to provide the woman with any additional reasons to view her as expendable, offering Ray a free haircut, especially when Pearl had a tendency to look down on men like him, was a direct affront to everything Pearl stood for. Yet, gazing at Ray, the man who had served his country, who had sacrificed more than most of those who judged him ever would, Jamal knew there was no choice to be made. If Pearl has a problem with it, she could deduct it from my paycheck, Jamal finally asserted, her tone firm yet composed. Ray exhaled, shaking his head with a hint of amusement. All right then, I'll see you later. Jamal watched him walk away, fully aware that she had just made a decision that would alter everything. The morning at Pearl's hair studio commenced like any other. Jamal arrived early, unlocking the glass door to the shop, inhaling the familiar scent of hairspray and freshly brewed coffee wafting from the small station in the corner. The salon was already alive with quiet conversations as clients settled into their chairs, flipping through magazines and exchanging pleasantries. The usual rhythm of the salon provided her with a sense of routine, of normalcy, even as a sense of unease weighed heavily in her chest. She hadn't shared her plans about inviting Ray with anyone, not out of shame, but because she understood how things operated here. The moment Pearl caught wind of it, there would be consequences. It wasn't solely about the money. Pearl's issues ran deeper than profit. She had a specific clientele and a certain image she wanted her business to project. In her mind, people like Ray, those who didn't fit into her meticulously polished world, were not part of it. Jamal worked through the morning, keeping her head down, letting muscle memory take over as she snipped, trimmed, and styled. But every so often, her gaze flickered towards the door, waiting. Then, just past noon, he walked in. Ray stood in the doorway, surveying the space like a man who knew he didn't belong yet had resolved to enter anyway. The salon grew noticeably quieter. A few women in expensive blouses glanced up from their magazines, exchanging subtle yet unmistakable looks. Jamal sensed a shift in the air, the way people stiffened, how their polite smiles faltered ever so slightly before they returned to their conversations. Ray ignored them, offering Jamal a slow, deliberate nod as he made his way to her chair. She kept her voice light. "You ready to let me work my magic?" He chuckled as he sat down, shaking his head. "Ain't much magic needed for this old head, but do what you gotta do." Jamal draped the cape around his shoulders, fastening at the neck before running her fingers through the tangled mess of silver-streaked hair. "You ever had a proper fade?" she asked. "Can't say I have." "Well, today's your lucky day," she replied, getting to work. The low buzz of clippers filled the air, drowning out the quiet murmurs from the other stylists and customers. As she worked, she found herself sharing stories about growing up in Rivertown, about how she had spent years striving to prove herself in a town that never truly embraced her. Ray listened, nodding occasionally, before finally saying, "You know, I spent years thinking uniform would make me matter, that if I gave enough of myself, this country would always have a place for me." Jamal paused mid-trim, watching him through the mirror. He gave a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Turns out, the second you stop wearing it, the second you stop being useful, people forget. They don't see the man anymore, just the assumptions they make about him." She swallowed, gripping the clippers a little tighter. "They don't get to decide who you are." Ray met her gaze in the mirror. "Neither do they for you." Jamal took a breath and continued, allowing the work to ground her, letting the weight of his words settle somewhere deep within her. By the time she finished, Ray resembled a different man. The rough, unkempt edges were gone, replaced by sharp, clean lines that softened the years etched in his face. He ran a hand over his freshly shaved jaw, exhaling slowly. "Damn," he muttered. "Almost forgot what I looked like." Jamal grinned. "Told you it was magic." For a brief moment, she forgot about Pearl, forgot about the tension simmering in the salon. All she saw was Ray, a man who had endured hell and back, finally appearing as himself once more. Then the door swung open, and Pearl walked in. At first, she remained silent, simply standing there, scanning the scene. taking in Ray in her chair, the way Jamal was brushing the last of the loose hairs from his shoulders. She set her bag down, her mouth pressing into a thin, unimpressed line. The room tensed. Even the stylists attending to their clients seemed to hesitate, as if bracing for the inevitable. Pearl didn't address Ray, didn't even glance at him. Instead, she turned her gaze toward Jamal and asked, her voice deceptively calm, "Did he pay?" Jamal felt it then, the crack, the moment where everything shifted. She knew in that instant that there was no version of this conversation that would end well, but she refused to look away. "I told him it was on me," she replied, her tone measured and composed. Pearl's expression barely changed, but her voice carried a sharpness that could slice through skin. "You told him?" A pause. "So we're just handing out charity now." Jamal clenched her jaw, but before she could respond, Ray interjected. "Didn't realize a haircut could be charity," he said, his voice steady yet firm. "Guess I missed a sign out front saying this place doesn't serve people like me." Pearl's eyes snapped to him, as if she were only just acknowledging his presence. "We serve paying customers." Ray's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Is that right?" He looked around the salon. "Funny. I don't remember getting turned away when I used to come here wearing a uniform." Pearl flushed, just barely. Jamal couldn't remain silent any longer. "I said I'd cover it. Take it out of my paycheck, if you have to." Pearl laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Oh, don't worry, I will. And while I'm at, I think I'll take a little extra for the trouble, because you know what happens when a place like this gets too comfortable with certain kinds of people. Customers stop coming." Jamal's pulse quickened. She had anticipated this moment, but hearing it out loud, the contempt, the venom dripping from every word, ignited something deep and raw within her. She set her clippers down slowly and deliberately. "If you're that worried about your customers, Pearl," she said, her voice steady and controlled, "then you don't need to worry about me taking up space here anymore." Pearl's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Jamal removed her apron, folding it neatly and placing it on the counter. "I quit." A hush fell over the salon. Pearl stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "You think you'll find another job that pays as well? You think people are going to line up to have their hair cut by—" She halted, but Jamal heard the words anyway. By a black woman who should know better than to step out of line?" Ray stood then, slow and steady, meeting Pearl's gaze with the quiet strength of a man who had faced far worse than her. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he stated simply. With a final glance at Jamal, he turned and walked out. Jamal followed suit, not looking back. The heat outside felt different when she stepped into it, as if the very air had shifted around her, thick with something heavier than just a southern summer. She had quit, and the words still echoed in her mind, not with regret, but with an almost surreal finality. Years of swallowing her pride, enduring Pearl's barely concealed disdain, and knowing she was the best stylist in that damn shop, but never being treated as such. All of it culminated in a single moment. Ray was already a few steps ahead, his pace steady yet unhurried, like a man who had seen enough to know that nothing surprised him anymore. He didn't turn around until they were halfway down the block. "You all right?" His voice was calm, unreadable. Jamal let out a slow breath, rolling her shoulders as if shaking off the weight of the past few years. "Ask me again in an hour." Ray gave a small nod, as if he understood more than he let on. He removed his cap, ran a hand over his freshly cut hair, and glanced down the street. "Come on, you need a drink." Jamal let out a dry laugh. "You buying?" "Damn right." They ended up at Murphy's, a small bar at the edge of town, the kind of place where people went to disappear for a few hours. The bartender, a man named Vic who had been pouring drinks longer than Jamal had been alive, raised an eyebrow when he saw Ray, but didn't ask questions. Jamal took her first sip of beer in silence, letting the cool bitterness settle on her tongue. The adrenaline still coursed through her veins, but beneath it lay something else, a clarity she hadn't anticipated. "I should be panicking," she admitted, setting her bottle down. "I just quit my job with nothing lined up, no backup plan, no safety net." She exhaled, shaking her head. "Pearl's been holding that damn contract over me for years. making sure I never had enough to start fresh. Now I've got nothing. Ray took a slow sip of his whiskey, observing her over the rim of his glass. You've got more than you think. Jamal let out a small, humorless laugh. Yeah? Like what? Ray leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the bar. You've got your reputation. You've got a whole town that knows you're the best stylist in that shop. Hell, the best in the county. You've got people who'd rather sit in your chair than anywhere else. He shrugged. And now, he added, you've got a story. Jamal frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Ray set his glass down, his expression thoughtful. I write for a reason, Jamal. People don't care about what happens behind closed doors. Not until someone forces them to look. Pearl, she's been running that place like a plantation, thinking nobody would ever call her out on it. But today, you did, and people saw it. They heard it. Jamal's fingers tightened around the neck of her bottle. That's not going to pay my bills. Ray's lips curled slightly. No, but it's going to do something better. She studied him, searching for the catch. And what's that? I'm going to write about it, he said simply. Not just what happened today, but everything. The way she treated you, the way she's been treating you for years. And I'm not the only one talking. Jamal exhaled, suddenly aware of just how many clients had been present when everything unfolded. Women who came in weekly, women who loved to chat. Word was already spreading. Ray tapped the counter, signaling for another drink. By tomorrow morning, the whole town's going to know exactly what went down. And Pearl, he smirked, shaking his head, she's going to wish she never opened her damn mouth. Jamal felt the weight in her chest shift, not disappear, but transform into something different. A slow, simmering realization that Pearl's grip on her was finally gone. She didn't have a job, didn't have a plan, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. And that felt like power. By morning, the town had turned against Pearl. Jamal woke up to a buzzing phone, messages piling in from people she hadn't spoken to in years, clients, friends, even former co-workers, each of them having heard the news. It had only taken one night, one article. Ray's piece ran in a local paper first thing in the morning, detailing everything. The years of quiet discrimination, the pay disparities, the way Pearl had always found a means to remind Jamal that she was merely a worker, never an equal. But it was the ending that struck hardest. Yesterday, Rivertown witnessed a black woman with more skill and heart than anyone in that salon punished for an act of kindness. We watched as a business that thrived on exclusion made it clear that the only thing it values more than money is control. Now we decide if we allow that to stand. Jamal scrolled through the comments, her stomach tightening. The town was furious. Pearl's hair studio was trending on local social media pages. Not in a positive light. Clients were canceling appointments, vowing never to set foot there again. Some were demanding Pearl step down entirely. The women who had been in the salon that day had remained silent. They discussed it with their families, their friends, spreading the story faster than even Ray's article could. Just like that, Pearl's reputation was crumbling. Jamal was still trying to process the whirlwind of events when her phone rang. A number she never expected. The mayor. She stared at the screen for a moment before finally answering. This is Jamal. Jamal, this is Mayor Benjamin Wallace. His voice was smooth but firm. I heard about what happened, and I read about it too. Jamal didn't respond. She was unsure of what to say. I'd like to meet with you today, the mayor continued. I believe Rivertown owes you a conversation. A conversation? By noon, Jamal found herself in the mayor's office, seated across from Wallace as he folded his hands on the polished desk. The man had been in office for years, always careful, always measured. But today he seemed genuinely troubled. I won't dance around the issue, Wallace began. What happened at Pearl's was unacceptable, and it doesn't reflect the kind of town we claim to be. Jamal arched an eyebrow. You sure about that? Because it seemed pretty normal to me. Wallace's expression tightened, but he nodded. That's exactly why I want to talk to you. He leaned back in his chair. I've had quite a few conversations this morning. Business owners, council members. Hell, even my wife had some words for me over breakfast. He exhaled sharply. People are upset, and rightly so. Jamal waited. She knew where this was heading. The town wants to do something to make this right, Wallace said carefully. Some have suggested we put together a fund to help you get back on your feet. Maybe even open your own salon. Jamal stilled. She had anticipated the town's reaction. She expected Pearl to take a hit, maybe even shut down. But this? People offering to hand her money? She hadn't seen that coming. She could envision it now. The headlines, the pity-filled nods. Rivertown redeems itself by helping the poor black woman it wronged. Her stomach churned. Wallace blinked. I'm sorry. Jamal lifted her chin defiantly. I don't want charity. The mayor looked genuinely confused. Jamal, this isn't charity. It's the community trying to do right by you. You want to do right by me? She leaned forward, holding his gaze. Then don't just throw money at the problem, so everyone can pat themselves on the back and move on. Fix the real issue. Call Pearl out by name. Acknowledge that what happened wasn't just unacceptable. It was discrimination. Make it clear that Rivertown doesn't stand for that. Wallace hesitated, his jaw tightening. Jamal let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. Yeah, that's what I thought. Before he could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Ray stepped in. Jamal frowned. She hadn't expected him to be there, but the moment their eyes met, she knew something was up. Wallace let out a small sigh, rubbing his temple. Let me guess, you have something to say too? Ray stepped closer, glancing at Jamal before speaking. You know she doesn't want a handout, but she does need something. Jamal frowned. Ray. He held up a hand to stop her. I own a building, he stated simply. It's been sitting empty for a while. It needs some work, but it has enough space for a shop. He shrugged. Figured it's about time someone used it. Jamal stared at him, incredulous. You what? Ray met her gaze steadily. You want to earn it, right? Then let's make a deal. You run your salon out of there and pay me rent when you get on your feet. No favors, just business. Silence stretched in the room. Jamal wasn't accustomed to people like Ray. Those who saw her not as a story to fix, but as someone worth investing in. She swallowed hard. You serious? Ray's lips quirked. I don't say things I don't mean. Wallace exhaled, running a hand down his face. Well, that certainly changes things. Jamal took a slow breath, then turned back to the mayor. So here's what's going to happen, she said, her voice steady. You're going to make a statement. You're going to say Pearl's name, and you're going to ensure every business owner in this town knows that what she did won't fly here. She leaned back, and I'll take care of the rest myself. Wallace studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. All right, Jamal, you've got yourself a deal. As she stepped outside the mayor's office, the weight of the conversation settled in her chest. The sun hung high, beating down on the pavement, but she barely noticed. This was real. The deal had been made. Not charity, not a handout, but an opportunity on her terms. For the first time since walking out of Pearl's salon, she allowed herself to believe it. Ray leaned against the railing beside her, watching the street like a man who had seen countless versions of this town. You all right? Jamal let out a slow breath, running a hand through her curls. I think I might be. He nodded, taking a moment before adding, You're going to need help. She smirked. Is that your way of offering? Ray shrugged. Got a few connections, people who owe me favors. I'll see what I can do. He paused and added, This place of yours, it's got to be more than just a salon. Jamal frowned, glancing over at him. What do you mean? Ray exhaled, his gaze steady. You're not just opening a business, Jamal. You're setting a standard. You saw what happened back there. This town's been turning a blind eye for years, and now they're watching. So you got to show them what's possible. Jamal held his stare, the unspoken understanding passing between them. He was right. This wasn't just about cutting hair. It was about proving something. By the end of the week, the building was hers. It wasn't much yet, just 4 walls, a cracked mirror, and an old neon sign from whatever business had occupied before. But standing in the empty space, Jamal could already envision it. She could see the chairs lined up the hum of clippers, the quiet confidence of clients walking out looking and feeling like their best selves. The work was slow. She refused to accept donations, no matter how many people tried to hand her cash with guilty smiles. Instead, she made every dollar count. She saved, she bartered, and she pulled favors from suppliers who had known her for years. Ray held up his end of the deal, introducing her to people who could help: painters, electricians, even an old friend with a knack for refurbishing furniture. The community rallied in ways she hadn't anticipated. People dropped by, offer what they could: a spare chair, a fresh coat of paint, or even just a kind word, not out of pity, but because they believed in her. Then one morning, it was ready. The Brooks Company Hair Studio opened its doors without a grand ceremony or speeches. Just an open door and the promise of something different. The first client walked in even before the open sign had settled in the window, followed by the next and the next. By noon, every chair was filled. Pearl's salon never recovered. Her regulars vanished, and the staff began quitting one by one until she was left managing a business that no longer had the reputation to survive. Within a year, she shut it down. No public statement, no announcement, just a quiet, unnoticed end to something that had once dominated Rivertown's beauty industry. Jamal never returned. Months later, one afternoon, Ray came by. He leaned in the doorway, watching as Jamal shaped the edges of a young boy's fade, her hand steady and sure. When she finished dusting off a cape, Ray gave her a small nod. "Told you," he said. Jamal smirked. "Told me what?" "That you had more than you thought." She looked around the shop at the clients, at the sign in the window, at the life she had built with her own two hands, and she knew he was right. The world isn't fair, but sometimes if you stand your ground, you can make it a little bit better. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.